Gloria and I, in fact, I thought when Ted was introducing us there with the hymnal and all that business, I was at the airport the other day in some city, St. Louis, I think, when a father introduced me to his son and said, "Son, I want you to meet Bill Gaither." And the kid looked at me for a little bit and did a double take and said, Bill Gaither said, "Are you still alive?" He said, "We got your songs in our hymnal at home." He said, "Only dead people are in that hymnal." And but I think I'm still alive, and it is good to be here. And Olivet is very, very important to us, a very dear place in our hearts. We've been coming up here, George, for 15, 16, I bet longer than that, 20 years. So,
that's where I was born.
Come on. Gloria just said that's before she was born. You want a mic? That went out. No, you're okay. But we always have a warm spot for Olivet in our hearts, and especially this building, because most of the time we've been up here, we've been in this building with a bunch of great young kids. I don't know where they keep getting a new good crop of great new young kids up here, but it seems like they always do. And I watched you as you came in, and it's another great crop of fantastic kids. Couple duds, but in general, great, fantastic kids. That's good to be here. Gloria and I started out teaching. In fact, I met her at the high school where she was substituting in French. She graduated with 3 majors. She majored in French and English and sociology. She graduated with cum laude with honors in all 3 of those subjects. I simply graduated and gave thanks to get out of the place. There are a lot more of them identifying with me out there than who are identifying with you, honey, on that one, on that particular comment. But I met her at the high school where we were both teaching, and I taught for 7 or 8 years before we started writing, and that took over our full-time life. And there is still something about teaching that really turns us on. We love teaching. We love kids. And in fact, this year, back in Anderson, at the church where we go, we are teaching the college class. We've got at our church there on the east side of town. We got about 175 kids who come out every Sunday morning. And we had a cookout at our house the other night. We got about 15 acres there where we live, and we had a night where we cooked hamburgers and hot dogs and all that, and had about 175 kids out there that night for the cookout. And a funny thing happened, and I want to try it here this morning to see if it works. It's probably bomb like crazy, but we'll try it. Since I have been around since from the beginning of time, we were writing songs when you kids were really very small. During that time of writing, we were writing some kids songs because we thought it was very important for kids to develop a very healthy self-concept early in their lives. All of you professors would agree with that. And we wrote songs like, I'm something special, I'm the only one of my kind, God gave me a body. And Amy used to sing it, our little Amy, who is now a sophomore down in Vanderbilt, in Nashville. She used to say, and a bright, healthy mind. But while we were around the campfire that night, we were singing scripture songs, Seek ye first the kingdom of God. And all of a sudden, these kids, and it kind of made this old man really feel warm. Warm and old. They started singing, I am a promise, I am a possibility, and it blew my mind that many kids did. How many of you kids sang that when you were little kids? I want you to sing it for me here. Am I on? Since you've had a lot of practice singing that song, I thought it would, because you know what? You're still promises. Amen? Most of you haven't turned out yet. So I thought it would. You're all in the process of becoming. And when you're 50, you're going to still be in a process of becoming. But I thought it might be fun here this morning for us to see how many of you know that song, and see if you could just jump in there and really amaze me. I can kind of sense the excitement building in the room already. Are you ready? You're going to sing it for me now? I am a promise. I am a possibility. I am a promise with a capital P. I am a great big potential. That's great. And I am learning to hear God's voice, and I am trying to make the right choices. I'm a promise to be anything He wants me to be. What's the new one? I can go anywhere that He wants me to go. I can be anything that He wants me to be. I can climb the high mountains. I can see. I'm a great big promise you. I am a promise. No dancing. I am a possibility. I am a promise with a capital P. I am a great big bundle of potential. And I am learning. And I am learning to hear God's voice, and I am trying make the right choices. I'm a promise to be anything He wants me. I'm a promise to be anything He wants. I'm a promise to be anything. And a great big ending. He wants me to be. Too early. That's great, and that is still true. And you are a promise, and you are becoming, and that's very, very exciting.
And awesome to think you told them that when they were 3, and they believed it.
And they believed it, and you should have believed it. Also, we're looking forward to the praise gathering. Dr. Dunbar has brought the Orpheus Choir down, for the last 12, 13 years. And I cannot tell you how much of a very important part of the Praise Gathering weekend. That is a very special weekend in Indianapolis, and Olivet University is always represented very, very well. And I understand now you are now from Bourbonnais and not from Bourbonnais anymore, so it's very good to have you down there. You know, it's interesting to have lived as long as I have lived, and
improved as little as you have improved.
Come on. and learn all these very, very wise things that I've learned. I just turned 50 the other day, and the guy who says that he can do anything at 50 that he was doing at 25 must have not been doing very, very much at 25. I'm at the place when I bend down and tie my shoes, I ask myself, is there anything else I ought to be doing while I'm down here, you know? So, but in working with the Christian church for the last 25, 30 years and surviving, it's really been interesting. And I thank God for my Nazarene background and the warm memories I have of prayer meeting days and Sunday mornings and Sunday nights and revival meetings and all of that. And it's permitted me to function in a pretty broad world, in all fairness. And in a pretty broad church world. And the thing that has blown my mind in this broad church world is this, the fact that I think in general the church world has done a much better job at learning how to become pious than they have really learned how to become spiritual. We've learned how to do some things and say things and use the right words. It was interesting talking to Steve, the young man who does a radio program before, and he was talking about how to have Christian radio in this century and the dreams that he has of making Christian radio to do a spoof on the church It does not do a spoof on theological words. It doesn't take the words that are very meaningful to us from a theological perspective. They take words like special. Oh, you're so special. What's the other word there? The share. We want to share something. When a guy comes on television, on a Christian television program, tells, "I like to share something with you," don't get too excited.
Don't believe it.
Don't believe it that he's necessarily going to give you something. He's probably what to ask you for something, rather than sharing something. And it blows my mind when the world comes in at us from the outside. They don't come in and make fun of the real things that are very meaningful to all of our faith. They come in and really spoof the stuff, our in-house language and our verbiage, and the stuff that permits us just to talk to each other. And when I look at a group of kids like this with the possibilities that you really do have, and you are a great big bundle of potentiality, it scares me to death when I look out here and look at kids like this. Somebody here, some kid in this room, is possibly going to be president. And with the people we got running these days for president, I go to it. I mean, we need some help at the top very, very quickly. Some of you are going to change the world in a very, very special way. And I know one of those guys come from Indiana too. But we're going to change the world in a very, very special way. And you can do it. And I think when Jesus prayed that prayer of, "Lord, keep them in the world, but don't let them become of the world," you don't have any other choice. You're going to have to go in the world. And you are going to have to get dirty. And you're going to get your hands dirty. And you are going to have to become involved. And you're going to need the words and the tools to help you do that.
I think it's interesting that there's two parts of Jesus' prayer, and they're both just as important. The first part is, "I don't pray that you will take them out of the world." And I think a lot of times we have defined our spirituality by building boxes around ourselves verbally, with our little words, our in-house verbiage, our safety zones, and withdrawing from the world, and we have mistaken that for spirituality. But Jesus prayed that we wouldn't do that. He said, I pray that they will stay in the world, but not be of the world. So the second half of that is then, how can you be in the world and be different from the world without distancing ourselves from the world around us? It's interesting that Bill mentioned verbiage, and the young man from the radio station, Steve, was talking about verbiage too. He was saying that he has a hard time not slipping into an announcer's tone of voice. He wants to be himself, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult for us. I wonder how... do you send groups out here from the college to travel in the summer? That puts you in a kind of a difficult position. It's very difficult to go out there and not act spiritual and yet be spiritual. How do you be yourself? How do you be a real live kid in the world, representing a Christian institution, but not being what I would call pious, saying, I'm a little better, looking down our noses at somebody. One year at Praise Gathering, we had a beautiful example of exactly what we're talking about. We had invited an incredible lady to be a part of Praise Gathering by the name of Emily, who had written a book on conversion called Turning, and another one on prayer called Clinging.
Bob Benson.
Bob Benson first introduced me to her, and I said, I don't want to read another book on prayer. He said, yeah, you do. So I read Emily's book, and I was so taken with the incredible simplicity of it. Bill and I, after we saw what she was saying, we did actually call her immediately and say, come and talk to us. The thing we were impressed with was that she did not use any of our in-house words. It was all fresh and new and simple. The main thing she said about prayer was, don't worry about the order in which you say certain things in prayers, or how prayer should sound, or whether you're standing or kneeling or sitting. Do it. Just pray. That really hit me because I didn't want to spend all that time talking about prayer and not doing it. Anyway, we had Emily Griffin. And there was a lady who came up after Emily finished speaking and attacked her viciously. Told her that she could not possibly be a Christian because she had spoken on conversion, and she did not hear any of the words. She hadn't said saved or any of the other words that this lady was used to hearing. And just totally raked her over the coals and left her in tears, totally dissolved in tears. So as it would be, by the way, Emily Griffin happens to be a Catholic, and a converted Catholic, a real born-again Catholic. So here she was in tears, having expressed her heart as much as and as simply as she knew how to express it. She stumbled out of the room with tears blinding her eyes, trying to figure out what in her heart had this woman attacked. And it seemed to be the very person she stumbled into as she exited into the hallway with her eyes full of tears was the Lutheran Walter Wangren, a person she had been taught had to be a heretic if he was a Lutheran. And this woman could not accept her because she had been brought up a Catholic, because she didn't hear her words. And I thought then about Jesus' prayer that we would love each other, and that the only proof would be our love for each other in the body of Christ. That's the only way the world will have to know that Jesus Christ actually was the Son of God. But here were three different people who did not hear the words they thought they had to hear. And so walls had been built. And in one incident, all these walls had to be, any kind of communication could happen.
Dr. Parrott isn't here today, but I don't know whether you know it or not, but Dr. Parrott speaks a lot in secular situations. He speaks on management and management techniques. He's very well educated and functions in a very, very broad world. He's a product of a Christian college background. Gloria and I are products of Christian college backgrounds. And the thing that is interesting, when the real product, and you kids are all in the potentiality, when the real product does come out and does get into the world, and it's a real thing, it can make a difference. Dr. Parrott is a very sought-after speaker in this whole management business and his theories on management and relationships and that particular kind of thing. Gloria I can say this, she can't say this, but I'm proud of her. Last February spoke the governor's prayer breakfast in Indiana, in Indianapolis. She spoke because a black pastor friend of ours in Washington, D.C. with a wonderful inner city program was going to speak, and some of the people knew her and knew that she had done some speaking. I think you were the first woman that probably ever spoke to that group of men, basically. Probably pretty male chauvinistic in attitude. An interesting thing happened that morning, and I was very, very proud of Gloria. These people, and I talked to Lou Gehrig, who's the head of the biggest PR firm down in Indianapolis. He said, I know some of those corporate heads who were there that morning, and they're pretty tough guys who drive pretty hard bargains and pretty hard deals most of the time. And here was this product of a Christian college who loved the Lord in a very warm kind of way, learning how to be the salt of the earth in a secular situation. And she was Gloria. She was Gloria at her best. And I sat back there. She spoke for about 20 minutes only. But it was a very powerful morning. She talked about relationships, and she talked to these corporation heads about the priorities, where they're putting priorities on their time, spending time with children and family and that kind of thing. We got mail after that so much, it blew our minds. Another interesting thing happened at the same time. We had a guy call us from New York who was doing a campaign for Indianapolis. The campaign was called Indianapolis Indeed. and said, "We have checked with ASCAP here in New York of the Indiana writers, music writers. We're a member of ASCAP." And they said there are 2 or 3 possibilities. One was John Cougar Mellencamp, who's a rock and roller from Indiana, and another guy I didn't know, and Bill and Gloria Gaither, who were gospel writers. And this guy from New York said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, they write gospel songs." And the only gospel he knew was black gospel. And he said, "Well, could they do this particular kind of thing?" And the guy said, "Yeah, they could." So he called Gloria, told her he wanted a Broadway kind of a feel to the song with the back home in Indiana kind of emotion and feeling to it about coming back home. And we wrote a song. The song is called Indianapolis Indeed, which has really been played now on all the Indianapolis stations, even on some of the rock stations, because it's just a fun, traditional kind of a tune. But it has allowed us the opportunity to talk to some people and truly be the salt of the earth. We were talking to an interviewer yesterday who said, does this note a change and a departure in your writing? We said, no, writers are writers. I believe all good writing comes from the Lord. I believe all inspiration comes from the Lord. But it was our opportunity in our given craft to be the salt of the earth and find some words to communicate to them. Now, it is and then Sandy Patty sang it. So the 4th of July this year, we were downtown on the Circle in Indianapolis with about 20,000 people, everybody and all the movers and shakers in the city. And here are these 2 gospel songwriters and this gospel singer person to sing the song, to represent the Lord in that kind of capacity. Finding words that will communicate to those people and still very much not becoming part of the world, but truly being the salt of the earth in the world. I believe in that very, very much.
The interviewer asked an interesting question yesterday. He said, do you think that there is a conflict between your Christian calling and writing a song like Indianapolis Indeed? And of course, our answer was that the longer we live, the harder it is for us to tell where our secular life and our spiritual lives, where one stops and the other starts. And that truly being a Christian was spiritual into the secular life, and our secular life is very spiritual. And he was over there, nodding like this, and afterwards said that he had been a part of Praise Gathering, which I did not know. But the fact that Christians can impact the street is, I think, what we're called to do. I heard someone say the other day in Anderson, Indiana, in relationship to volunteerism, programs like the Crisis Pregnancy Center, fighting pornography in our town, working with street kids, all kinds of agencies that were looking for volunteers and help. They said, don't ask the church. That's the last place. That made me very sad. And a lot of you kids are sitting out there saying, is there a ministry for me? I mean, do I prepare to go do ministry, and then, suddenly there's this wonderful year that comes along and I've graduated from Olivet, and then I now have a ministry and I go out and I serve as maybe a foreign missionary or a preacher. I got to tell you, there's ministry for you right now, right here and now. In this city, probably there are 4-H clubs and Boy Scouts clubs that you guys need to be looking into so that you can be some crisis pregnancy centers that need volunteers. There are some work with kids who are abused or who have had difficult home lives. We really need very much big sisters and big brothers to adopt these kids. Christ calls us to not just, quote, find a framework for ministry, but to involve ourselves in the daily of our community and our lives.
One of the tragedies that I have found in the 25, 30 years of serving in the evangelical community is the fact that the questions that we have been asked about what we do have very little to do with substance. You listening? Most of the questions have had to do with style. For instance, everybody knows there's no bigger battleground in the world in the Christian church today than music. The guy who said music is a universal language lied. It is the most divisive element in our society today. It has probably become more divisive since we now have the electronics and the wattage to get it at the level where you do have to vote one way or the other on it. And the thing that has blown our mind within the Christian church is we all have preferences, and we know this. For instance, I played Ted Lee and Dr. Parrott, the Indianapolis Indeed tune, and I thought I was going to have them bow their heads and have every eye closed and give an altar call. They were so moved just by the music, just by the music of the whole thing. Now, the interesting thing is this, and we are all conditioned by our culture to respond to certain things. But the thing that has blown my mind within the Christian church is this. Most adult Christians don't know the difference between their theological absolutes and their cultural preferences. They really don't. In the 25 years that we have been performing in the evangelical circles, I could put 90 to 95% of our criticism all in the category of the criticisms in the category of style. Very few times have I had anybody write me about theology. Was your theology straight? Was your theology good? Let me go back to Emily Griffin and the praise gathering. That same year, we had a young group four of them used to play backup for us on stage. They were young kids, pretty bored with our particular kind of music, probably, if they were honest. But in the afternoon, they get playing their own kind of music. And they eventually became, it was Billy Smiley and Gary Lund and Dan Huff, they eventually became Whiteheart. We know these kids. They love the Lord. They're really into what they're doing. When they would do their music in the afternoon, I'd usually try to go off in the corner somewhere or get away because it was loud. I didn't basically care for the volume at that level and all that, but I knew the kids. Now my son loved it. I mean, he thought it was great. But then an interesting thing happened. We had them because we knew them. We thought, there are a lot of young kids, and some of them from Olivet, coming down who like contemporary music. So we thought we'd put them in an afternoon program. Well, there were some older people who, for whatever reason, got into that section in the afternoon. Bad mistake. We should have had a warning notice out front. It could be dangerous to your health. Stay away. Only come if you're sure, But we understood the I like it and I don't like it. But the thing that really hurt us and crushed some young kids, Dan Huff, later when Los Angeles has become one of the biggest guitar players in Los Angeles, is on every major session you can be on in L.A. There were 4 young kids who really got trampled by some older Christians that day. I mean, kicked, literally. I mean, emotionally kicked by saying you're of the devil and everything else, and some pretty unkind things. The second day they performed, this young lady went down and introduced them and said, if anybody hurts these kids, you're going to have to come over my dead body to get to them, just about, But it has blown my mind that in all of those years that we get tied in to verbiage, and we get tied in to cultural approach, and we get tied in. Now, I'm not going to say that you're not going to have your preference. I think it's great, Harlow, that every chapel, you kids have to sing a hymn. You have to learn stuff from the past. It's part of heritage, and it's very, very important. You need to listen to classical music, and you need to do all of those kinds of things. Because the thing that's interesting is Benji, who's our young son, who's a freshman this year, he's a young rock and roller. But you know something? He'll come home every now and then and put on Mozart. Blows my mind. I say, well, great. He's broadening his world, which is what we're hoping is going to happen to him. I mean, there's all different kinds of food out there for him. And it's not necessarily good or bad, just on a style basis. Now, lyrics can make it good or bad. And I think you kids are knowing what I'm talking about here. But your challenge is going to be, how can we zero in on the important things, and knowing that we have to live within our culture and use the tools of our culture and make it make as much sense as possible, but still be true to our message.
I think all of us have had the refreshing experience of coming across a brand new Christian who doesn't know our words. There is nothing quite so exciting. I remember one night we were doing a concert somewhere, and at the end of the concert, Bill and I were standing down front talking to people, and this gorgeous woman came running up the aisle. She was about 40 years old, and she looked like she was 20. She looked like a model. Threw her arms around Bill's neck. And
a wonderful memory.
So I waited for an explanation, waited to see what was going to happen next. And she said to him, "Bill, I'm Rosie. Do you remember me, Rosie Fisher from high school?" He said, "You knew me when I was just a nice little cheerleader, went to church, and I didn't know what any of that was about." But she said, "Boy, do I have something to tell you." And for 10 or 15 minutes, while people began to gather around, this exuberant, gorgeous woman started telling what God had done in her life. She had grown up a Catholic, and she had gotten involved in a charismatic underground prayer group. And somebody introduced her to Jesus. And boy, she was truly, truly changed. And so excited that she just couldn't quit talking about it. And the tears were just rolling down her face, and her makeup was dripping on her shirt, and she didn't care. She was telling Bill about what had happened to her since he last saw her in high school. About a week or two later, I was in a proper tea room next door to a dress shop having lunch, and Rosie came in and saw me across the room and hollered at the top of her lungs. I mean, this is a very educated, finely turned out lady. But she yelled across the room, "Gloria!" And she came over across and sat down at my table. And again, began to share what God was doing in her life. And it was so beautiful. I couldn't help praying to myself, "Lord, don't ever help her never to learn our words." Because she was so reckless with her love for the Lord. And it was so attractive that Rosie literally turned upside down in the city of Muncie. She had for years done style shows. She'd been in sororities and all these things. She didn't withdraw from those things. She turned them into Christ events. And how she got away with it, I don't know. But her enthusiasm was so genuine, and her life was so changed, and she loved people so much that she just simply changed that town. Her husband was a very prominent dentist in town. They were quite wealthy. So she just used all of that as a way to contact more people. About 2 years ago, we found that Rosie had cancer. And I took her with me on a trip right after she had discovered it to New York. I was speaking at the Walter Hoving Home for delinquent kids. I wish you could have seen Rosie at that home. She had just gotten the news that week that the lump was indeed malignant. All that did was intensify for her the urgency. And she loved those kids in that home. She was putting on nail polish to one little gal who had been abused as a child and had a teenage pregnancy at about 13, and her boyfriend was in prison. And I mean, Rosie knew the story of every kid in that school by the time we left at 4 o'clock that afternoon. And this spring, Bill and I attended Rosie's funeral. Her sweet husband, who was not a very communicative kind of guy, real reserved, he had decided to not have anybody come in and take care of her at the end. She was in a coma a lot of the time. But sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night. That was the time she was most often lucid at the end. And he wanted to stay right there in her room in case there would be an hour, any time of the night, where she'd want to talk. And he said she always wanted to talk about the Lord. And make sure that she got everything said that needed to be said for her 4 teenage daughters that she was leaving unfinished. The infection of a Christian who simply loves God and is willing to make a fool of him or herself for Christ's sake is incredibly attractive. It's what we are called to be. Not to learn nice, safe church words or forms, but to simply be in the world, but not of it. One of my favorite kinds of literature is children's literature. And I would like to read you a couple paragraphs from a story that I used to read my kids about the time we were writing things like I'm a Promise. And I guess this little paragraph or two will epitomize what we want to say, and that is that we hope that you will learn while you're here to discover what is real and to give yourselves away recklessly, carelessly, for what is truly real. This is about a little rabbit that was given to a little boy in his stocking at Christmas, and at first the little boy paid a lot of attention to the stuffed rabbit, but eventually, like most toys, it kind of got kicked into the corner for a while and forgotten. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being made only of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toy, everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself. And he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion who was made by the disabled soldiers and should have had broader views, put on airs and pretended he was connected with the government. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace, and the only person who was kind to him at all was the skin horse. Now, the skin horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away. And he knew that they were only toys and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the skin horse, understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you're made," said the skin horse. "It's this thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long time. Not just to play with, but really loves you. Then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you're real, you don't mind being hurt." "Well, does it happen all at once?" he asked, or bit by bit? "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily or who have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you're real, most of your hair's been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But those things don't matter at all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly, except to those people who don't understand. I guess what we want to say this morning is that God calls us to be used up. And maybe by the time he gets us where he wants us to be, our hair will be loved off and we will be loose in the joints and our eyes may drop out. Bill likes to say he's 50, he's halfway through. Planning on living a long time. And if he's halfway through, he should be half used up. And if we're not, what are we saving ourselves for? Some of the dearest people in our lives are the people who have lived with reckless abandon. Whether it's been Rosie, who only lived her 45 years, or Aunt Lily, who we buried 2 weeks ago, who was 96, and had 96 years to throw herself away. Or maybe a child who doesn't know any more than to just run up and put their arms around a stranger's neck and say, I love you. But most of all, Christ calls us all at every stage in our life not to save ourselves preparing for later, but right now, whatever your now is, whether you're a professor or the head of this institution or a scared freshman or a sophomore who knows everything, or an experienced senior, and I have a feeling the seniors are the scaredest of all. You're not preparing for something out there. This is it. This ain't the rehearsal. It's the real thing. And if you're not ministering now, you probably won't minister the year after graduation either, or 10 years from then. You are called right now to forget the verbiage, to find what is really real, to love folks with recklessness, to not build artificial boxes to stay safely in, but to learn how to give yourself away for the things that last forever. Could we pray with you? Jesus, we want to take seriously the prayer that you prayed for us. Help us to find ways to be in the world, to shove ourselves into the streets, into the places of need, into the places where we have to work hard and get dirt under our fingernails, into the places where we are forced to tears that embarrass us. Shove us out there where we have no choice but to care. But in our caring, help us to be different and unique, and may that difference be our hearts. May we be reckless about being yours. Forgive us, Lord, when we have played it safe by making nice, neat boxes for ourselves to keep us from the world, and made sure that we were safe in there by calling each other names based on form and style. Help us to get rid of such false measure sticks and to be willing to be measured naked by your yardstick, which is, one commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. Help us to use ourselves up today, knowing that with sleep tonight will come a new day and a new fresh supply of energy to love again. And may we live every day of our lives like that until we're all used up. Amen.
With his blood he has saved me. With his power
He has raised me to